Welcome, brave souls. Tonight you'll step into a chilling nightmare, a tale of shadows that linger and fears that refuse to leave. Beware, for this story will remind you that some watchers never rest, and no lock can keep them out. Are you ready to face the stalker who never left?
It started on a cold, rainy evening. As I walked home, I felt someone following me. Turning around, I saw a shadowy figure staying just far enough to remain indistinct. My pulse quickened and I crossed the street, hoping it was a coincidence. But they followed, their steps matching mine. I sped up, weaving through the streets, but they never lost pace. My breath grew ragged as fear settled in. The figure kept their distance, but their presence was suffocating. When I finally reached my apartment, I paused to look back. They stood under a streetlight, their face hidden in darkness. I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands shook as I checked the peephole. The figure remained outside, across the street, motionless. I couldn't see their face, but I felt their gaze pierce through me. Sleep was impossible that night, my mind racing. Every sound in the apartment seemed amplified, each creak feeling like an approaching footstep. I barely slept, plagued by the thought that they were still out there, waiting. In the morning, I gathered my courage and opened the door, only to find a folded piece of paper slipped underneath. The note read, "I see you." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't my imagination. The nightmare was real, and whoever this was, they knew where I lived. Panic set in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to find a way to protect myself before things escalated further. Over the next few days, the figure remained a constant presence. I saw them everywhere. Outside my office, at the grocery store, even near the gym. They never approached, but their mere presence was enough to keep me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Desperate for help, I confided in my friend Mark. He dismissed my fears, joking that I had an admirer. But this wasn't admiration. It was something far more sinister. I felt trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. And deep down, I knew it would only get worse. Determined to gather proof, I installed security cameras around my apartment. If they ever got too close, I would have evidence to show the police. The first night after installing them, I stayed awake, watching the live feed, hoping to catch them in the act. Around 2 a.m., the motion detector pinged. My heart pounded as I checked the feed. There they were, standing at the edge of the camera's view, just outside the building. They didn't move, didn't try to come closer. They just stood there, staring directly at the camera. The next day, I took the footage to the police. They reviewed it, but told me there wasn't enough evidence to act. "Unless they commit a crime, there's not much we can do," the officer said. Frustration and fear boiled within me. How could I stop someone who refused to leave? Each night, the figure returned. Sometimes closer, sometimes further, but always visible on the cameras. The notes continued too, each more unsettling than the last. "You can't hide. I'll always find you." Sleep became a luxury, my sanity slowly unraveling. I began skipping work, unable to focus on anything but the stalker. Mark checked in on me, concerned about my deteriorating state. I showed him the footage, and his expression changed. "This isn't normal," he muttered, but even he didn't know what to do. One night I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. I froze, watching the live feed as the figure stood right at my door. They didn't knock, didn't try to force their way in. Instead, they slid another note under the door and walked away. I waited until I was sure they were gone before picking up the note. This one simply said, "See you soon." My stomach churned. This was more than a game to them. It was an obsession, and I was their target. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant surveillance, the threats, it was breaking me. I quit my job, packed my things, and moved to a new apartment across town. I hoped a fresh start would free me from this nightmare. But deep down, I feared it wouldn't. For a week, everything seemed normal. No shadowy figure, no notes. I began to feel a sliver of hope. But one night, as I returned home, I froze. Propped against my door was a familiar folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The note read, "You can't escape me." My vision blurred with panic. How did they find me so quickly? It felt like I was being hunted by a ghost, someone who knew my every move. The walls of my new sanctuary now felt like a prison. I contacted the police again, showing them the new note. They offered little comfort. "We'll increase patrols in your area," they said, but I knew it wouldn't stop them. Whoever this was, they were determined to drive me to the brink. The next few nights were unbearable. The figure returned, standing under the street lamp across from my new building. Each time I checked the security feed, they were there, unmoving, their gaze fixed on my window. I was losing my grip on reality. I stopped leaving my apartment altogether, afraid they would follow me again. My isolation deepened, and paranoia consumed me. Every noise felt like a prelude to an attack. I began hearing whispers at night, though I couldn't tell if they were real or imagined. Then one night I woke to find my front door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. I was sure I had locked it. I checked the footage, but there was nothing. No sign of forced entry. But I knew they had been inside. They were closer than ever. The next day I noticed subtle changes in my apartment. Objects slightly out of place, drawers left open, lights turned on. I wasn't alone. The realization made my skin crawl. They weren't just watching, they were invading my life. I tried calling Mark, but he didn't answer. Desperate, I left him a voicemail begging for help. Hours passed, and still no response. I felt abandoned, completely isolated in my growing terror. I knew I couldn't face this alone, but I had no choice. That night, I barricaded my door and sat in the corner with a kitchen knife. Every second stretched into an eternity. The air felt heavy, charged with impending doom. Then, around midnight, I heard faint footsteps just outside my door. They stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then came the soft sound of paper sliding under the door. My hands shook as I reached for it. This note was different, longer. It read, "You can lock your doors, but I'm already inside your mind." I screamed in frustration, ripping the note apart. But the message echoed in my head, taunting me. I checked the cameras again, but the figure was gone. I was left alone with my fear, spiraling further into madness. My grip on reality was slipping. Mark finally called back the next morning. "You need to get out of there," he urged. He offered to come over, but I refused. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this nightmare. Whatever was happening, I had to face it alone. That evening, I noticed a new note taped to my bathroom mirror. "Mark can't save you. No one can." My stomach dropped. How did they know about Mark? They were closer than I'd ever imagined, watching my every move. I felt utterly trapped. Mark showed up at my door despite my protests. "We're leaving," he said firmly. Reluctantly, I grabbed my things. But as we stepped outside, a chilling sight greeted us. The figure stood at the end of the hallway, blocking our escape. Mark froze, his confidence wavering. "Who the hell is that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. The figure slowly advanced, their footsteps echoing through the corridor. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the emergency exit. We bolted down the stairs, the figure's steps following close behind. My lungs burned as we reached the lobby. The door wouldn't budge. We were trapped. "Call the police!" Mark shouted, but my hands were shaking too badly to dial. The figure stepped into the lobby, their face still obscured. They raised a hand, pointing directly at me. "It's you they want," Mark said, his voice trembling. He stood in front of me, shielding me. "Run!" he yelled, but my legs felt like lead. The lights flickered, and in that brief darkness, the figure closed the distance. I heard Mark scream, and when the lights returned, he was gone. Only the figure remained, now standing inches from me. They whispered, "You'll never be free." Everything went black. I woke up in my apartment, alone. There was no sign of Mark or the figure. My phone rang. It was the police. They found Mark's car abandoned, but no trace of him. I realized the truth. I was the only one who could see the stalker. The figure returned every night, and I knew they always would. Their haunting presence was eternal, a punishment I could never escape. I was condemned to a life of fear and solitude, forever haunted by the stalker who never left.
The story may have ended, but nightmares have a way of clinging to you, following you into the dark. Tonight, when the shadows lengthen and you feel that creeping dread, remember, some nightmares don't end when you wake up. If this story left you uneasy and you crave more terror, hit the like and subscribe button. The real nightmare is only just beginning.